They say every empire leaves a shadow that never truly fades. But Persia's shadow is something else. Not darkness, but a golden afterglow, still shimmering thousands of years later across deserts, mountains, and hearts. Once upon a time, before Greece learned to build marble cities, before Rome dreamed of eternity, there was Persia, a land where kings called themselves not conquerors, but caretakers of the world, a place where art, order, and faith intertwined into something almost divine. Yet, most people today only know fragments. Cyrus the Great, a name half remembered. Xerxes, a villain from old movies. Persepolis, a ruin lost in dust. But what was Persia really? Was it an empire of unstoppable armies, or of gentle philosophers, a story of human ambition, or divine destiny, or perhaps, like all great civilizations, it was both, brilliant and doomed, noble and flawed? Before we continue this journey, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Maybe, somewhere far from you, someone else is hearing this poem story, imagining the same ancient fire flickering beneath the stars. Let's go back, long before Alexander's march, before the Greeks carved their gods into stone. To a land cradled by mountains and sun, where shepherds watched the heavens and believed that light and darkness were not just opposites, but cosmic forces forever at war. This was the Iranian plateau, vast, high, and silent. Its rivers ran through lands that would one day be called Media, Elam, and Parthia. Its people lived between worlds, east and west, desert and forest, myth and reality. They spoke of Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord, the light that ruled over all truth, and in their prayers they dreamed of a just world, a world that someday a righteous ruler would bring. That dream took form in the 6th century before Christ, in a young man named Cyrus, born of 2 tribes, destined to unite them all. He was no mere warrior. He believed that kingship was not a throne but a duty, a sacred pact between heaven and earth. Cyrus rose not through cruelty, but through vision. He overthrew tyrants, yet spared the defeated. He conquered lands, but offered freedom instead of chains. When Babylon fell to him, its people did not cry. They cheered. He freed their slaves, restored their gods, and wrote what many call the first declaration of human rights, etched in clay, in words still soft and gentle. I am Cyrus, king of the world. I have not allowed anyone to terrorize my people. I have kept peace. Under his hand, Persia became not just an empire, but an idea that power could serve justice, that empires could be built not on fear, but on respect, and that humanity, in all its languages and faiths, could coexist under one sun. But the story of Persia is not a single lifetime. It is a flame, passed from hand to hand, from king to king, from age to age, and like all flames, it would one day flicker, bend, and nearly die. Tonight, we begin the journey of that flame, from the deserts of Cyrus to the marble halls of Persepolis, from the battles of Xerxes to the philosophies of Zoroaster, from triumph to tragedy. and to the question that haunts all civilizations. Can a dream of justice survive the weight of power? The wind that crossed the Iranian plateau carried more than dust. It carried destiny. Somewhere near the mountain city of Anshan, a child was born who would one day be called the father of nations. His name, Cyrus. Legend says that his birth was foretold in dreams. The king of the Medes, Astyages, dreamed that his daughter's son would one day overthrow him. Fearing this prophecy, he ordered the newborn child to be killed. But fate, as it often does, chose mercy over cruelty. The infant Cyrus was spared, hidden by a humble shepherd and raised among the mountains, unaware of the divine storm waiting in his name. Years later, when he returned Obdolming to claim his destiny, he did not come as a tyrant, but as a unifier. He gathered tribes who spoke in different tongues, worshipped in different temples, and dreamed different dreams, and made them one. He told them, "We are not subjects. We are Persians." That word, Persian, would soon echo across the earth. Cyrus's empire began not with destruction, but with balance. He respected local customs, honored defeated kings, and ruled through governors called satraps, men who governed regions with loyalty and autonomy. It was order, not chaos. Law, not domination. For perhaps the first time in human history, an empire was built not just on conquest, but on principle. When his army marched toward Babylon in 539 BCE, the people inside the city were weary of their own king. As Cyrus's banners appeared beyond the walls, there was no resistance, only relief. Babylon opened its gates. Its temples remained untouched, its priests unharmed. And when the clay cylinder was carved, now resting today in the British Museum, it carried words that seem impossibly modern. I am Cyrus. I returned the gods to their shrines. I returned the displaced to their homes. To the Jewish people, this man was no conqueror. He was a liberator. He allowed them to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple, earning him the title Messiah in the Hebrew Bible. To the Babylonians, he was a restorer of peace. To the Persians, a father of order. To the world, a king unlike any other. Cyrus's Persia stretched from the shores of the Aegean Sea to the valleys of the Indus, a realm so vast that dawn and dusk touched it at the same moment. Yet, he ruled not through fear, but through faith. Faith in justice, and in a moral order that outlasted men. And yet, even the gentlest rulers cannot escape the laws of fate. In his final campaign against the Massacate, a fierce nomadic people beyond the Jagartes River, Cyrus fell in battle. His death was as mysterious as his rise. Some say he was killed by Queen Tomaris herself. Others claim he disappeared, never to be found. But his legacy, it did not die. Long after his body turned to dust, Persia lived on, in the hearts of kings who dreamed not of gold, but of greatness. At Pasargadae, his tomb still stands, small, quiet, almost humble. No marble, no grandeur, just a stone chamber under a sky that never sleeps. On its wall, once written, were the words, O man, whosoever thou art, and whence soever thou comest, for I know thou shalt come. I am Cyrus, who founded the empire of Persia. Do not grudge me this little earth that covers my body. Even in death, his humility spoke louder than the pride of 1,000 kings. And through that humility, the Persian dream began. A dream of unity, of wisdom, of light triumphing over darkness. But as all dreams do, it would soon be tested. Because after Cyrus came men who sought not harmony, but glory, and the balance he built began to tremble. When Cyrus fell, the empire trembled, but it did not fall. His dream still burned, fragile yet alive, carried in the hands of those who believed Persia was not just a kingdom, but a destiny. From that uncertain dawn rose Darius, a man whose mind was as sharp as the edge of his sword, and whose vision would turn Persia into the greatest empire the world had ever seen. Darius was not born to rule. He was a nobleman, a distant relative of Cyrus, chosen not by inheritance, but by fate. Legends say that after the death of Cambyses, Cyrus's son, chaos erupted across the empire. False kings claimed the throne, cities rebelled, and the dream of Persia began to fade. Then came Darius, calm, deliberate, and utterly certain. In the shadow of the royal palace, he and 6 companions slew the usurper and restored the throne. When the crown touched his head, he did not smile. He whispered only one word, order. And so began an age unlike any other, the Age of Gold. Darius was not merely a ruler. He was an architect of civilization. He divided the empire into provinces, each governed by a satrap who answered to the king but ruled his people with local customs intact. To ensure loyalty, he created a network of royal inspectors, the eyes and ears of the king, who roamed the empire silently, ensuring justice flowed like water. But Darius's greatest creation was not political, it was spiritual. He saw himself as chosen by Ahura Mazda, the wise lord of Zoroastrian faith. On the cliffs of Behistun, he carved his story into stone, 300 feet above the earth, so even the wind could read it. The inscription spoke of truth, of righteousness, of the eternal struggle between light and lie. In its words, Darius declared, "By the favor of Ahura Mazda, I am king. May Ahura Mazda protect this land from the lie, from the enemy, from famine." Under him, the empire pulsed like a living being. Roads stretched from the mountains of Media to the shores of the Mediterranean, veins of stone connecting 50 million souls. Messengers could ride from one end of the empire to the other in days. At every station, fresh horses waited. "Nothing mortal travels faster than Persian couriers," wrote Herodotus. "Neither snow, nor rain, nor darkness of night can stop them." In the heart of this empire, Darius built his masterpiece, Persepolis. It was not merely a city, it was a hymn in stone. Terraces carved from rock, stairways so wide they seemed made for gods, columns rising like frozen music into the desert sky. At Persepolis, Darius gathered the art of the world, Babylonian sculptors, Ionian craftsmen, Egyptian goldsmiths, and wove their skills into one vision. Here, the subject nations of Persia were not shown in chains, but in procession, bringing gifts, not fear. It was the architecture of respect, the geometry of peace. Yet within all this splendor, Darius never forgot the lesson of Cyrus. Power must serve justice. He reformed taxes, minted pure gold coins, the derrick, and allowed freedom of worship across his lands. For a time, it seemed that Persia had achieved what no empire had before: strength without tyranny. glory without cruelty. But there was one horizon Darius could not ignore, the restless lands across the Aegean Sea. Greece. To him, they were small and disordered, city-states without unity. But rebellion stirred there, and when the Ionian cities rose against Persia, Darius saw not revolt, but insult. The Persian dream, once about harmony, now began to reach beyond its own limits. Ambition replaced patience. Expansion replaced balance. And for the first time, the flame that Cyrus lit began to waver in the wind. There are moments in history when empires breathe too deeply, when their lungs fill not with air, but with pride. For Persia, that moment came with Xerxes, son of Darius. He inherited not just a throne, but the weight of the world. From the shores of Egypt to the mountains of Bactria, the empire bowed before him. The courtiers called him King of Kings, shadow of God on earth. Yet behind his gold crown, Xerxes carried a restless inheritance, a father's unfinished war. Darius had once sent his armies westward, across the Aegean, to punish the Greek city-states that had dared to defy Persian rule. But his plans had ended in failure at Marathon, a humiliating scar on an otherwise perfect reign. When Darius died, the task of vengeance fell to his son. Xerxes was not his father. Where Darius was measured, Xerxes was magnificent, grand, poetic, unrestrained. He saw himself as the vessel of destiny, the chosen of Ahura Mazda to bring order to the barbarous lands of Greece. But destiny, as Persia would learn, is not a river that flows only one way. In 480 BCE, the world held its breath. Xerxes gathered what may have been the largest army humanity had ever seen. Hundreds of thousands of men, drawn from every corner of the empire. Egyptians with bronze shields, Indians with chariots, Medes with their tall hats and curved bows. Behind them, warships, 1,000 strong, filled the horizon like a moving city of wood and sail. From the cliffs of Hellespont, he ordered a bridge built from boats, 2 vast floating paths linking Asia to Europe. When a storm destroyed it, he did the unthinkable. He commanded his men to whip the sea, to chain the water as punishment. Some called it madness, others called it faith. Across the narrow strait, Greece waited. The mountain pass of Thermopylae, a mere thread of land between cliff and sea, became the stage for immortality. There, King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans stood against the storm. The battle was brief. The Persians overwhelmed the defenders, arrows darkening the sun, the air thick with ash and screams. Xerxes watched from his throne of ivory, unmoved. But even in victory, he felt something shift, a silence that the wind could not explain. Then came Salamis. The Persians, masters of the land, now sought to rule the sea. But the narrow straits favored the Greeks. As dawn rose, Athenian ships rammed the Persian fleet, wood splintering, men drowning in the smoke of their own fires. Xerxes watched again, this time not as a god, but as a man. His dream of conquest sank beneath the waves. The great invasion ended not with triumph, but with retreat. Persia remained vast and unbroken, yet the illusion of invincibility had cracked. The empire had looked beyond its borders for glory, and found only exhaustion. When Xerxes returned to Persepolis, the air there had changed. The grand halls echoed with whispers. The king who had once commanded oceans now spoke to empty corridors and silent gods. Some say he turned inward, searching for solace in wine and rituals. Others whisper he became paranoid, fearing betrayal from those he once called brothers. And in time, one night within his own palace, Xerxes was murdered by his own guard. Thus ended the mightiest of Persia's kings, not by sword, but by silence. The wars of fire had shown the world Persia's brilliance and its humanity, for even kings of gold are made of flesh. Yet the empire did not fall. It would live on for more than a century, adapting, enduring, reshaping itself like a river that refuses to dry. But the seed of decline had been sown, not in battlefields, but in the human heart. In the heart of the Persian plateau, where mountains touch the clouds and silence hums like music, there lies a city that still dreams, even in ruins. Its name is Persepolis, the city of the Persians. To stand before it today is to stand in two worlds, one of dust and one of memory. Broken columns reach skyward like the ribs of a sleeping giant. Carved stairways ascend to nowhere. The sun glints off ancient stone, and for a moment, if you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. The echo of sandals on marble, the whisper of incense, the low hum of an empire that believed it would last forever. Persepolis was not built for war. It was built for wonder. Darius the Great began it. Xerxes expanded it, and later kings adorned it with the wealth of the known world. It was never a capital in the political sense. It was a ceremonial heart, a cosmic stage for a civilization that saw order not merely as law, but as divine harmony. Every spring, during Nowruz, the Persian New Year, envoys from across the empire journeyed to Persepolis, carrying gifts from every land beneath the Persian sun. Indians brought ivory and gold. Egyptians brought linen and papyrus. Greeks, spices and silver. Ethiopians, obsidian and rare animals. And they did not bow in humiliation as conquered subjects. They came in reverence, acknowledging the vast, ordered balance that Persia represented. The walls of Persepolis still tell that story. Carved in stone are lines of men side by side, each bearing their nation's treasures. Their faces are calm, dignified. There is no whip, no chain. Instead, a silent unity, the visual language of empire as harmony. Inside the great Apadana, the audience hall, 72 columns rose, each one the height of a modern building. At their peaks were twin bulls, symbolizing strength and patience. Beneath them, the king would stand, a figure not of divine arrogance, but of cosmic responsibility. For in the Zoroastrian belief, a ruler's duty was not to dominate, but to sustain truth, to guard against Druge, the lie, the disorder that threatened creation. But beauty has its own dangers. Persepolis shone so brightly that it began to blind those who lived within it. Generations passed, and the kings who followed Xerxes drifted farther from Cyrus's humility and Darius's wisdom. The empire grew softer, richer, and more fragile. Gold replaced discipline. Ritual replaced meaning. The city that once symbolized eternal order became a mirror of decay, still perfect in form, but hollow in spirit. In the silence of its halls, the gods no longer answered. Far to the west, new powers were rising. Among them, a young Macedonian king whose name would one day become a storm whispered in every tongue: Alexander. He grew up hearing tales of Persia's glory and of Greece's wounds. To him, conquering Persia was not greed. it was destiny, and destiny once more was moving toward Persepolis. But before we reach that fire, linger a little longer in this dream. Imagine standing atop the terrace of Persepolis as night falls. The torches burn softly along the colonnades. Below, thousands of guests feast, their laughter echoing under the stars. Musicians play harps. The fragrance of wine and myrrh fills the air. In that moment, Persia seems eternal. A civilization bathed in gold, guided by the light of the wise Lord. And yet, in that very perfection, the seeds of its end already lie waiting, silent, invisible, patient, because all cities built for eternity eventually meet their night. And for Persepolis, that night would come not as erosion or time, but as fire. The night the stars vanished over Persia, the wind smelled of smoke and wine. For centuries, Persepolis had stood untouched, the beating heart of the Persian world. Its terraces had watched the rise and fall of kings. Its stones had carried the footsteps of prophets and poets. But in the spring of 330 BCE, that silence broke. From the west came Alexander of Macedon, the boy who would be called the Great. He was only 25, but he carried the fury of generations. To the Greeks, Persia was not just an empire. It was a shadow that had loomed over them for 150 years. Marathon, Thermopylae, Salamis, old wounds that never healed. To Alexander, conquering Persia was more than war. It was vengeance wrapped in destiny. When his army crossed the Zagros Mountains and descended into the Persian plains, the empire was already crumbling from within. The once mighty Achaemenid dynasty had grown soft, divided, and slow to react. Its last great king, Darius III, fled rather than fight, and the son of Macedonia, swift and merciless, followed the fleeing lion into its den. When Alexander entered Persepolis, he found no resistance. The city opened its gates. The royal treasury, said to contain more gold than any realm on earth, lay before him. He walked through halls lined with immortal carvings, past towering columns, and reliefs of kings long turned to dust. To his soldiers, this was triumph. To the city itself, it was the sound of the end. For months, Alexander stayed in Persepolis. He dined in the palaces of Darius. He sat on the throne of Cyrus. He admired the walls that once symbolized the order of the world. Some say he wept at their beauty, but beauty too can burn. The fire began during a feast. Wine flowed like rivers, and the conqueror, still young, still mortal, let pride intoxicate him. At his side sat Thais, a Greek courtesan who whispered words history never forgot. Will you let the house of Xerxes stand, the man who burned Athens? Set fire to their pride, Alexander. Let Greece avenge herself tonight. Drunk on triumph and memory, Alexander rose. He seized a torch, held it high, and threw it into the cedar beams of the great hall. Flames leapt upward, fierce and hungry, racing along the painted ceilings, devouring centuries in minutes. The soldiers followed. Drunken laughter became shouts. Shouts became roars. Roars became screams. The fire spread through the halls, the courtyards, the colonnades, until Persepolis itself became a pyre of civilization. From miles away, shepherds on the plain could see the glow, a second sun rising where no dawn should be. For 3 days, the city burned. The gold melted, the statues cracked, The pillars collapsed like broken memories, and with every ember that rose into the night sky, the dream of Persia drifted upward into legend. When morning came, the smoke hung heavy, and Alexander walked through the ruins, silent, pale, and trembling. Some say he ordered the fire in drunken rage. Others say he tried to stop it when sobriety returned. But the deed was done. The city of light was now a city of ash. He knelt before the blackened stones and whispered, "Was this victory or sacrilege?" No one answered. Only the wind moved, carrying with it the last breath of the empire that had once called itself eternal. And yet, even in ruin, Persia did not die. Its spirit, its art, its philosophy, its vision of order and justice survived in the hearts of those who remembered. In the centuries to come, new dynasties would rise upon its ashes, new prophets would speak its truths, and new empires would borrow its light. But the flame of Persepolis, the fire that consumed beauty itself, would forever remind the world that no empire, no matter how enlightened, can escape the shadow of its own pride. When the flames of Persepolis faded, the empire's stones cooled into silence. But the spirit of Persia found refuge not in walls, but in belief. Empires crumble. Faith endures. Long before Cyrus, long before Darius carved his name into rock, there had been a whisper carried across the Iranian plains, the voice of a prophet who looked into fire and saw eternity. His name was Zarathustra, or, as the Greeks would later call him, Zoroaster. He lived perhaps 1,000 years before the kings of gold, born among herders and wanderers. In a world torn by violence and superstition, he began to question everything. Why do men suffer? Why do the just perish while the wicked thrive? And if the gods are many, why does the world not have peace? Then, one day, on the banks of a shining river, the answer came. He saw a being of light, Vohu Mana, the embodiment of good mind, who led him into the presence of Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord, the source of all that is true, just, and pure. Zarathustra emerged with a revelation that would forever shape Persian thought. There is only one true God, the light, and against him stands the lie. Angra Mainyu, the spirit of chaos and darkness. The world, he said, is not ruled by gods at war, but by a single divine truth in constant struggle against falsehood. Every human soul is a participant in this cosmic battle. Every choice, every word, every act of kindness or cruelty tips the balance between order and decay. To live righteously was to walk the path of Asha, truth, justice, and harmony. To lie, to harm, to exploit, was to serve the darkness. No priest could save you. No sacrifice could buy your way into heaven. Only your deeds mattered. It was a faith built not on fear, but on responsibility. The Persians embraced it not as doctrine, but as destiny. Zoroastrianism gave their empire its moral backbone, the idea that the ruler was not a god, but the guardian of order. When Darius wrote of Ahura Mazda in the Behistun inscription, he was not inventing faith, he was acknowledging it. Even after Alexander's fire, when temples fell and idols were shattered, the sacred flame burned on. In hidden shrines across the mountains, the Magi, Zoroastrian priests, kept the eternal fire alive, feeding it daily, whispering prayers to the light that refused to die. To the Persians, fire was not merely a symbol. It was the presence of truth itself, the breath of Ahura Mazda made visible. To look upon it was to remember that even in darkness, there is something that cannot be destroyed. And so, while Greece celebrated its victories and Rome began its rise, Persia turned inward, rediscovering its soul. It rebuilt itself not in marble or gold, but in silence and devotion. Villages gathered around fire temples. Children were taught the words of the Gathas, Zarathustra's hymns, sung softly beneath the stars. For centuries, Zoroastrianism became the quiet pulse of Persian civilization. It shaped their ethics, their laws, their sense of justice. It even seeded ideas that would later echo through Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The struggle of good and evil, the final judgment, heaven and hell, the coming of a savior. It was Persia's invisible empire, one that no conqueror could burn. The flames of Persepolis had turned to ash, but within those ashes glowed something eternal, a light that asked humanity not to worship power, but to understand truth. And in that light, Persia found its rebirth. Yet as time moved forward, the empires of men would rise again, each one claiming to restore the old glory, each one trying to carry the torch of Cyrus and Darius. The next would rise from the eastern mountains, fiercer, prouder, and determined to reclaim Persia's place beneath the sun. They would be called the Parthians, and they would fight not only for land, but for memory itself. For centuries, Persia had been quiet, its great capitals in ruins, its spirit flickering in hidden temples. But beneath the silence, something ancient was stirring again. In the rugged lands of Parthia, where horsemen rode across endless plains, and the wind sang over the mountains, a new dynasty began to rise, born not from palaces, but from the frontier. They were the Parni tribes, fierce nomads who had once served under forgotten kings. And under their bold leader, Cyrus the Great, they struck against the dying remains of Alexander's successors, the Seleucids, seizing land after land, until the dream of Persia breathed again. Thus began the Parthian Empire, ruled by the Arsacid dynasty, heirs not of Greek conquest, but of Iranian freedom. They called their land Aran-Shahar, the realm of the Aryans. Their kings wore simple crowns and rode among their soldiers. Their empire was not built of marble and decree, but of alliances, oaths, and the thunder of cavalry. The Parthians did not seek to copy the Greeks. They sought to outlast them. They ruled lightly, allowing cities to govern themselves, faiths to flourish, and trade to flow from China to Rome. And along the Silk Road, caravans once again carried the whispers of Persia: silk, spices, gems, and stories of fire that never dies. But soon, another empire's shadow darkened the western sky. Rome, the iron beast of the Mediterranean, was expanding eastward, consuming everything in its path. And when Roman generals looked upon the maps of Asia, they saw a land they could not resist, the old empire of Cyrus, rich and proud. In 53 BCE, the Roman legions marched under Marcus Licinius Crassus, one of the richest men in history, eager for glory and gold. He crossed the Euphrates with 40,000 men, heavy infantry, standards gleaming beneath the desert sun. But waiting for him at Carrhae was a Parthian general whose name would echo through time: Surena. Tall, silent, wrapped in armor of silver and silk, Serena commanded an army unlike any Rome had ever seen. Swift horse archers and cataphracts, heavy cavalry that moved like thunderclouds. As the Roman lines advanced, the desert began to hum. Arrows rained like a storm, endless, precise, merciless. Crassus's men broke ranks, their shields splintered. Their formation dissolved under the relentless assault. The Parthians never stopped firing, their quivers refilled endlessly by hidden supply lines. And then came the charge. Ironclad riders crushed through the broken Roman lines, lances flashing in the sun. When the dust settled, 30,000 Romans lay dead or captured, including Crassus himself. His severed head was sent to the Parthian court to be used as a stage prop in a play about vengeance. It was a humiliation that Rome would never forget. For the first time, the greatest army on earth had been shattered, not by barbarians, but by Persians reborn. From that day forward, the Parthians became the silent nightmare of Roman ambition, a reminder that the East could never be tamed. Yet the Parthians were not an empire of walls and monuments. They thrived in movement, in negotiation, in patience, in endurance. For nearly 5 centuries, they stood as Persia's shield, holding Rome at bay, keeping the torch of Iranian civilization burning between empires. But even as they ruled, cracks began to appear. The nobles grew powerful, the kings grew weak, and the fire of unity dimmed once more. From the heart of Persia, a new family began to whisper, claiming descent from Darius, vowing to restore the ancient order of Zoroastrian light. The world was about to change again, and when the Parthians finally fell, the flame passed into new hands, hands that would shape the last and greatest pre-Islamic empire of Persia. They would be called the Sassanians, and under their rule, Persia would rise to its most glorious and tragic heights. When the Parthians faded, the land of Persia did not crumble into silence. Instead, from the sacred city of Istakhr, near the ruins of Persepolis, a priest's son rose from the shadows of forgotten temples. His name was Ardashir, and he carried in his blood the whisper of kings, claiming descent from Darius the Great himself. Where others saw the ruins of a fallen world, Ardashir saw a destiny waiting to be reborn. In 224 CE, he marched against the last Parthian king and shattered his armies at Hormozgan. The empire of the horse archers fell, and from its ashes rose the Sassanian Empire, a new Persia, forged in both fire and faith. Ardashir crowned himself King of Kings of Aran Shar. He rebuilt temples to Ahura Mazda, restored the sacred fires, and revived the old laws of Zoroaster. Every flame that burned in Persia's fire temples was said to represent the divine light of truth, the eternal struggle against darkness. To the Sassanians, their empire was more than land or people. It was a living reflection of cosmic order, Asha, the harmony of creation itself. Under his son Shapur-Vers, Persia flourished once again into a realm of splendor and defiance. Shapur, a warrior philosopher, expanded the empire's borders and faced its greatest rival, the Roman Empire. In 260 CE, he did what no Persian had done before. He captured the Roman Emperor Valerian alive. For the first time in history, the Emperor of Rome knelt before the King of Kings. It was not just a victory. It was vengeance, written in divine ink across the sands of time. But the Sassanians were more than conquerors. They became builders of beauty. They raised cities of marble and gardens of paradise. Ctesiphon, Gundashapur, Nishapur, where poets, scholars, and physicians gathered under domes that glittered with mosaics and gold. Their art merged realism with divine symbolism. Their architecture reflected balance, symmetry, and the duality of light and shadow. They perfected Persian engineering, from canals and bridges to vast irrigation systems that turned deserts into blooming plains. And within their courts, the language of Middle Persian flourished, shaping the very foundation of Persian literature and identity for centuries to come. Their religion, Zoroastrianism, became both their unifying spirit and their burden. Its central idea, the battle between light and darkness, good and evil, infused every law and every war. To protect the faith was to protect the world itself. And yet, this purity sometimes hardened into intolerance. As the Sassanians grew powerful, they also grew rigid, suspicious of change. Still, their cultural brilliance could not be denied. From India to Byzantium, their influence spread in art, philosophy, music, and medicine. They stood as the last bridge between the ancient and medieval worlds, preserving the knowledge of Greece, Egypt, and Babylon, even as Europe fell into its dark centuries. But time is a patient hunter. The wars with Rome grew endless, each victory costing more than the last. The flames of the temples burned high, but the treasury grew empty. And far to the south, in the deserts of Arabia, a new faith was rising, a faith that spoke of unity beyond kings, beyond empires, beyond fire itself. When Khosrow II, the most splendid of Sassanian kings, reached his height of glory, Persia stretched from Egypt to the Indus. But within a few decades, the tide would turn. Civil war, betrayal, and exhaustion would leave the empire open, fragile before a wind of change it could not yet comprehend. The fire still burned, but the air was growing thin, and soon a voice would echo from the sands, a voice that would change not only Persia, but the entire course of the world. The winds of the desert do not knock, they whisper. And in the early 7th century, a new whisper began to rise across the sands of Arabia, a voice unlike any the Persian world had heard. For centuries, the Sasanian Empire had stood as the last great fire of ancient Persia. Its temples glowed with eternal flames, its cities hummed with scholarship, and its kings rode through history like gods on horseback. Yet beneath the splendor, the empire had grown fragile. Wars with Byzantium drained its wealth. Nobles feuded for power. Famine and plague whispered warnings across the plateau. The fire burned bright, but its wood had begun to crack. Meanwhile, in the deserts of Arabia, a prophet named Muhammad spoke of a new truth, a faith of unity, simplicity, and devotion. His followers were few at first, but their conviction burned hotter than the Persian flames. Soon, the desert winds carried these words northward, across dunes and rivers, into the borderlands of an empire that had thought itself eternal. In 633 CE, Persian generals confronted the first Arab armies at Al-Qadisiyah. The battle was fierce. Dust and steel intertwined, the air thick with smoke and the cries of men. Yet the Sassanian cavalry, once invincible, faltered. The empire that had shattered Rome and resisted Alexander now faced a people driven by unshakable faith, lightning-fast mobility, and unwavering unity. Rostam Farrokhzad, the greatest Sassanian general of his time, fought with honor and strategy. His arrows darkened the sky, his lances cut through waves of enemies. But even the mightiest blades cannot turn the tide when history itself has shifted. By nightfall, the Sassanian army was broken. The empire, once the jewel of civilization, had begun its final collapse. The Arabs advanced swiftly. Cities fell, including Ctesiphon, the jewel of the empire, its grand archways and palace domes now echoing with the silence of inevitability. Temples were abandoned, sacred fires extinguished. Yet even in this apparent destruction, something extraordinary happened. Persia did not vanish. Its culture, art, language, and faith survived, woven into the very fabric of the new Islamic world. Scholars in Baghdad preserved Persian medicine, astronomy, and philosophy. Poets sang in Persian long after Zoroastrian priests had retreated to the mountains. The flame of Persia endured, even if its form had changed. The Sassanian kings themselves did not disappear immediately. Some fled eastward to Khorasan, others to mountain fortresses, holding onto fragments of their legacy, hoping for revival. But history had moved on. A new world order had arrived, one built on the pillars of a faith that demanded not fire temples, but mosques, not kings, but devotion to Allah, not marble columns, but community and scripture. And yet, the heart of Persia, its spirit of order, justice, and intellectual brilliance, survived beneath the surface. It would resurface in later dynasties, the Safavids, the Ghaznavids, the Seljuks, each time stronger, refined, and wiser. The old fires became the foundation for new light. The lesson of the fall was simple, yet profound. No empire, no matter how radiant, can escape change. But even in defeat, the soul of a civilization can endure, quietly shaping the world for centuries to come. Persia had burned, it had fallen, it had been conquered, and yet it had never truly died. Its fires, like whispers in the desert wind, continued to inspire, a light that refuses to vanish. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the vast Iranian plateau, its mountains rising like silent sentinels, its deserts shimmering under the endless sky. Hear the wind brushing over ancient stones, carrying whispers of kings, prophets, and poets, voices that span millennia. Persia, in its entirety, was never just an empire of conquest. It was a civilization of ideas, of light, of moral imagination. From Cyrus's unifying vision to Darius's orderly brilliance, from the triumphs and tragedies of Xerxes to the enduring wisdom of Zoroaster, Persia embodied a delicate balance, power and conscience, glory and humility, ambition and ethics. Even when the cities burned, at the hands of Alexander or later at the arrival of Islam, the spirit endured. Persepolis may have turned to ash, yet its design, its purpose, and its poetry of stone persisted in memory and culture. Zoroastrian fire, though hidden, continued to flicker in the hearts of those who remembered what truth and justice meant. History shows us that empires rise and fall, yet ideas endure. Persia's stories is a reminder of the fragility of human achievement and the resilience of human spirit. It asks us to ponder, what truly defines the legacy of a people? Is it the gold in their treasuries, the strength of their armies, or the wisdom they leave behind? The answer seems to lie somewhere in between. It lies in the way Cyrus treated the conquered, in the harmony Darius sought to build, in the philosophical fire of Zoroaster, and in the courage of Parthian horsemen who resisted Rome. It lies in the poems of the Sassanians, the art they created, and the knowledge they preserved. Persia's empire may have crumbled, but its flame never did. And there is a lesson for us too, not in politics, not in conquest, but in human conduct. Persia's story encourages reflection, to seek order in chaos, truth in deceit, light in darkness. It teaches that civilizations are not measured solely by their power, but by their capacity to leave wisdom, culture, and inspiration behind for those who follow. As you imagine the high terraces of Persepolis, the golden temples, the flowing rivers, and the endless mountains, consider this: the legacy of Persia is still with us. It whispers in the names of streets, in the art of civilizations that came after, in philosophies and stories that continue to inspire. It asks us, quietly, to carry our own flame, to balance ambition with ethics, to pursue knowledge, and to honor the light within us, even when the world seems dark. And perhaps, as you drift deeper into thought, you can hear it, the soft echo of an empire that touched the heavens, fell to dust, and yet continues to illuminate the human heart. Persia's story is not just history. It is a meditation, a reflection, a mirror. And in that mirror, we see not just kings and battles, but ourselves. As the night deepens, imagine standing on a quiet hill overlooking the Persian plateau. The wind carries the scent of wildflowers and desert dust, mingled with the faint memory of fire and incense from centuries long past. Beneath your feet lies the land of Cyrus and Darius, of Persepolis and Ctesiphon, of warriors and poets, of priests and dreamers. Persia, in its long and winding history, was a civilization of paradoxes, vast yet intimate, powerful yet humble, fragile yet enduring. It rose with the vision of kings, the courage of soldiers, and the devotion of believers. It fell beneath the flames of invaders, the tides of change, and the passage of time. And yet, its light, like a hidden ember, never died. Every stone, every relic, every story left behind is a testament to that enduring flame. Even in silence, Persia speaks of balance and harmony, of justice and responsibility, of ambition tempered by conscience. It reminds us that greatness is not measured then solely by empire or wealth, but by the ideas, culture, and wisdom that survive long after the kings are gone. Close your eyes again. Picture the terraces of Persepolis, lit by the soft glow of a setting sun. Hear the laughter of envoys carrying the gifts from distant lands, the whispers of scholars sharing knowledge, the prayers of priests tending the eternal flame. In that moment, you can almost touch the heartbeat of history, a pulse that has endured despite fire, conquest, and time itself. Persia teaches us that legacies are not built merely in stone or gold. They are built in light, in thought, in human spirit, and they endure in quiet ways, in whispers carried on the wind, in the poetry and art that survive the ages, in the moral truths that outlast the mightiest swords. Tonight, as you sit in quiet reflection, know that you have walked with empires, heard the echoes of kings, and glimpsed the soul of a civilization that still burns softly in memory. Persia, in all its brilliance and fragility, continues to inspire, a gentle light for anyone willing to see beyond the ruins, to feel the depth of history and to carry its lessons into our own lives. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and let us know once again where you're listening from tonight. Perhaps someone from your country is hearing this same story at this very moment, gazing at the same stars, and feeling the same soft ember of Persia's eternal flame. Good night, and may the light of history guide your dreams.